Welcome to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. Callers and guests will need to take a position, be able to defend it with an argument that is factual, not emotional. And if you can't make your point without insulting someone, you can't make your point on this show. Callers and guests will be treated with complete respect. For my part, I will ask questions that matter and give people the opportunity to answer. And on that note, later in the show, I'm going to talk to you about what happened last night when I called into a radio show, just to contrast what happens on other shows to what happens here. My website is www.youdefendit.com. That's youdefendit.com. You can give me your comments on the show anytime. By Friday of each week, I will have the topic up for the next day's show. You can also visit my blog through the site, and you can read my posts and leave your own. I particularly appreciated the posts that were left recently, and I hope you have a chance to visit my site and read the blog section. Okay, the guest lineup for the Sunday TV news shows is as follows. ABC's This Week will have House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. CBS Face the Nation will have Vice President Joe Biden. NBC's Meet the Press will have National Economic Director Lawrence Summers and Representative John Boehner, Republican, Ohio. CNN's State of the Union will have David Plouffe, who was the Obama presidential campaign manager, New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, Senators Lindsey Graham, Republican, South Carolina, Kent Conrad, Democrat, North Dakota, Representative Mike Pence, Republican from Indiana, and Doug Faith, former Undersecretary of Defense. Lastly, Charles Swift, former Naval Defense Attorney. Fox News Sunday will have Senators John McCain, Republican from Arizona, and Charles Schumer, Democrat from New York. All right, today I want to talk about the war on terror, and as I mentioned a minute ago, I'm also going to tell you about my experience last night when I called into a radio show. With respect to the war on terror, I want to focus on Guantanamo. That's a big issue this week. Barack Obama announced that he would be closing it within a year, and that generated a lot of debate and discussion. And for me, that was an opportunity to really look at this issue and bring some of the facts forward that I think we need to have a remedial understanding of if we're going to discuss this issue. And I want to read first from an article in the New York Times, January 23rd. That would be yesterday. War on Terror. And the headline was, Guantanamo detainees not in my state. And I'm only going to read portions of the article. One day after President Obama ordered that the military detention center at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, be shuttered, lawmakers in Washington wrestled with the implications of bringing dozens of the 245 remaining inmates onto American soil. Republican lawmakers who opposed Mr. Obama's plan found a talking point with political appeal. They said closing Guantanamo could allow dangerous terrorists to get off on legal technicalities and be released into quiet neighborhoods across the United States. If the detainees were convicted, the Republicans continued, American prisons housing terrorism suspects would become magnets for attacks. Meanwhile, none of the Democrats who on Thursday hailed the closing of the detention camp were stepping forward to offer prisons in their districts or states to receive the prisoners. Senator Christopher Bond, Republican of Missouri and Vice Chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, taunted the chairwoman, Dianne Feinstein, Democrat of California, by suggesting that the authorities reopen Alcatraz prison in San Francisco Bay. One of the first Democrats in Congress to address the not in my backyard issue directly was Representative John Murtha of Pennsylvania, who told reporters this week that terrorism suspects would be no more dangerous in secure Pennsylvania prisons than they were in Cuba. There are thousands of dangerous prisoners being held securely behind bars in supermax prisons across the United States, Mr. Murtha said Friday. He noted, however, that there was no supermax facility in his district. The number of detainees who may face federal trials, by various estimates 50 to 100 of the remaining Guantanamo inmates, is tiny by the standards of the federal prison system, which currently holds 201,375 people in 114 facilities, according to Felicia Ponce, a spokeswoman for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Those include 9 detention centers that hold defendants awaiting trial, 21 high-security penitentiaries, and a super-secure prison in Florence, Colorado, where several convicted terrorists are already locked up. Lastly, Sarah Mendelson, a scholar at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, who led a study of options for closing Guantanamo, said it would be best if detainees facing prosecution were indicted while still at Guantanamo and then moved into federal pretrial facilities in the United States, which routinely house people accused of murder and other dangerous crimes. We've had extremely dangerous terrorists tried in various courts and put away, Ms. Mendelson said. Federal courts have convicted 145 people on terrorism-related charges since 2001, according to one review, while the military commissions at Guantanamo Bay have been plagued with delays and legal setbacks. All right. I want to go through this article a little more in depth because I think it is a perfect example of the garbage that passes for discussion of issues. Let me say this first off. You know who determines where the prisoners go, where the convicted go, which prison they're in? The Bureau of Prisons. Not even the judges. They don't decide. When somebody is convicted of a crime in the federal system, when they are sentenced, they are turned over to the Bureau of Prisons, and the Bureau of Prisons has absolute sole authority over where they are housed. So with one of the first major issues of the Obama administration, we already have both sides engaging in a completely ridiculous discussion of whose district is going to house them. It's ridiculous because none of them have the authority to decide that. And yet, that's where we're going. Well, I noticed that they're not offering to take them in their backyard. They don't have a choice. They don't get to offer. They don't get to decline. A major national security issue being discussed in this country in a pro-wrestling type of manner. There's no substance to this discussion whatsoever. Not one thing that was being discussed yesterday matters. Because the people who are discussing it and who are making suggestions, number one, don't have the authority to carry through, and number two, know it. You know, it is an amazing thing to me, but where is this is an incomplete article. Where's the New York Times saying something along the lines of, this entire discussion is academic because the ultimate power to determine where these people are housed rests with the Bureau of Prisons, not with Congress. It's absurd. But, you know, that's what I do on this show. I point out where these things are absurd and where they're not. And this is not a discussion worth having as far as which congressman or which senator is going to volunteer to have these people housed in their districts. It's a complete non-issue. And, unfortunately, that is something we specialize in discussion of important issues in America. And who's at fault for that? Everybody's at fault. It starts with the people who are making these statements who know that they are not true. And the media, these reporters know the facts. These reporters know the systems. They should be bringing that to the attention of the readers. We'll be back. You're listening to You Defend It on News Radio 1290 WMBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. We left off talking about an article in the New York Times wherein different political figures were baiting other political figures into agreeing to accept the Guantanamo detainees in their own districts. All right. I want to stay on Guantanamo. And there was another story this week. This was in the New York Times also. And it's this. I'll read very briefly from it. The headline was, Guantanamo detainee resurfaces in terrorist group. The emergence of a former Guantanamo Bay detainee as the deputy leader of al-Qaeda's Yemeni branch has underscored the potential complications in carrying out the executive order that President Barack Obama signed that the detention center be shut down within a year. The militant, Saeed Ali al-Shahiri, is suspected of involvement in a deadly bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Yemen's capital, Sana'a, in September. He was released to Saudi Arabia in 2007 and has passed through a Saudi rehabilitation program for former jihadists before resurfacing with al-Qaeda in Yemen. His status was announced in an internet statement by the militant group and was confirmed by a U.S. counterterrorism official. They're one and the same guy, said the official, who insisted on anonymity because he was discussing an intelligence analysis. He returned to Saudi Arabia in 2007, but his movements to Yemen remain unclear. Okay. Now, I trust you're all able to stop laughing at the phrase Saudi rehabilitation program for former jihadists. That was the hardest part of the show so far, reading that and continuing. However, I do think that this article raises some questions that cry out to be answered. First of all, and most importantly, I think, what was this guy doing before he was detained at Guantanamo? That's really the big one here. Because if he was a terrorist, then why wasn't he tried? Why did the Bush administration release him if he was a terrorist? I've said on this show many times, my position on this is really clear. If we have people in custody who have committed terrorist acts against the United States, they should be brought here. They should be tried by the finest federal prosecutors in the world, ours, and if convicted, they should be killed. They should be put to death. That is my view. Now, we have seen with the evidence-gathering process at Guantanamo so far that there are going to be issues with respect to how you fairly try these people. But it should at least be attempted. And if these are truly dangerous people, people responsible for 9/11, people responsible for planning something like 9/11, then you do what you do in any war. You kill them. That being said, how did this man go free? And why was he returned to Saudi Arabia, of all places? I assume it's because he was from there, like almost everybody else who was involved in September 11th. If he was not a terrorist, though, think about that. If he was released because he was not a terrorist, I don't know what the criteria for being admitted into the Saudi rehabilitation program for former jihadists is. However, if this person was not in fact a terrorist, isn't it legitimate to wonder if his 5-year stint in a box at Guantanamo has anything to do with his current desire to kill people? Now, I know the circular arguments that statements like that usually generate. Well, you're coddling terrorists, and then the other side says they're not terrorists until they're proven to be terrorists, and they must have been must not have been a terrorist because they were released. You know, it's almost incomprehensible, this fiasco at Guantanamo and what to make of it. I think it's a fair statement that the Bush administration took a hard line on terrorism, to their credit. Therefore, when they release somebody, I have to think it's because this person is not one of what Donald Rumsfeld referred to as the worst of the worst, which is supposed to describe everybody at Guantanamo. Why was he let go? I think it's worth thinking about. Could we have set up a system at Guantanamo that turns people into bitter, vicious, anti-American killers? You know, I don't like to wait in line at the Department of Motor Vehicles. If somebody held me for 5 years for something I didn't do, I'd be upset. No question about it. But we don't know. We don't know what happened with this person. We don't know what his background was, whether he was involved with any group or suspected of being involved. All we know is that the Bush administration released him, and now he's on the battlefield. And I think that raises a lot of questions worth thinking about. Okay, this is another very brief article. This is from globalsecurity.org. This was this week as well. This is a couple sentences long. As of January 17, 2009, approximately 245 detainees remained at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. That's all I'm reading from that article. Here's my question. Who are they, and what happened to the rest of them? There was 500 or 600 people there at one point in time. They weren't tried. I think we've had, I don't know, have we had any trials? People at Guantanamo? Maybe 3 or 4 actual trials of people who've been there since 2002? The discussion generated by Barack Obama's decision to close that facility is a classic example of an entire issue being exhaustively debated in this country with almost no understanding of the actual people involved, of the facts. When we come back after the break, after Paul Harvey, or Paul Harvey Jr., I'm going to read to you from a report that I'm going to also have posted on my website later today. But I think it's important for Americans to understand, as I do with every issue on this show, what the facts are, or at least the other side of the facts. We've been told that the people who are at Guantanamo are the worst of the worst. Donald Rumsfeld was fond of saying that. If they were so bad, then out of over 500 some, how can there only be 245 left? What happened to the rest of them? They weren't tried. They had to be released back to their countries. How can that be? This report goes into detail as to the criteria by which people were detained. And I think I want you to draw your own conclusions from it. It itself is not unbiased. It's written by a lawyer for 2 of the detainees. However, the documents that he used to compile the statistics in the report were written by the Department of Defense. So when we get back, we'll talk about that. And at the end of the show, if there's time today, I want to talk about my experience calling into a radio show last night and contrast that with the experience of people calling into this show. I may not agree with everybody who calls in, but I treat them with respect, and the one thing I don't do is cut them off. On this show, if the phone call is going to end, there's going to be an announcement ahead of time. Thanks for the call. I got to go, something like that. I'm going to, at the end of the show, tell you how the rest of talk radio works. And so that when you're listening to other shows, you'll be able to pick up on things that you may not have realized were going on. But it's intellectually dishonest the way other shows are handled. And it's the reason that I want these people out from behind their microphones and debating in public to see when they're not manipulating the format, when they're not manipulating the information that gets out from that studio. Let's see if they know what they're talking about. Because the way it's set up right now, it's simply rigged. That's all there is to it. Paul Harvey is up next from 8:30 to 8:35. We will be back after him. You are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer, right here on News Radio 1290, WNBF, Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. All right, as promised, I have a report on Guantanamo detainees. And the headline is, A Profile of 517 Detainees Through Analysis of Department of Defense Data. It was written by Professor Mark Denbeaux, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, D-E-N-B-E-A-U-X, and Joshua Denbeaux. And in the interest of full disclosure, they represent, or at least Professor Mark Denbeaux does, 2 detainees at Guantanamo. I will read you just briefly from the introduction so you get an idea of who the people are that wrote this and where their information came from, and then just a quick summary of some of the things that are in it. And I want you to have an opportunity to read the entire report if you like. It'll be on my website at the end of the day. It is 28 pages long. Okay. This report is the first effort to provide a more detailed picture of who the Guantanamo detainees are, how they ended up there, and the purported basis for their enemy combatant designation. The data in this report is based entirely upon the United States government's own documents. This report provides a window into the government's success, detaining only those that the President has called the worst of the worst. All right. Among the findings of the report are that 55% of the detainees are not determined, even by the government, to have committed any hostile act against the United States or coalition forces. 8% of the detainees are al-Qaeda fighters. Of the remaining detainees, 40% have no definitive connection with al-Qaeda at all, and 18% have no definitive affiliation with either al-Qaeda or the Taliban. 5% of the detainees were captured by American forces. 86% were arrested by either Pakistani or Northern Alliance forces and turned over to the United States custody. This 86% of the detainees captured were handed over to the United States at a time in which the United States offered large bounties for capture of suspected enemies. And I want to read to you a couple other brief conclusions in the report. Approximately 10 people have been charged with any crime related to violations of the laws of war. Now, there are over 500 people who have been detained at Guantanamo. And that a large majority of the detainees never participated in any combat against the United States on any battlefield. And I want to read to you from a leaflet that the government provided with respect to these bounties and what it said and how people may have been persuaded that it was in their interest to turn people over to the United States government. The United States promised large sums of money for the capture of persons identified as enemy combatants in Afghanistan and Pakistan. One representative flyer distributed in Afghanistan states, "Get wealth and power beyond your dreams. You can receive millions of dollars helping the anti-Taliban forces catch Al-Qaeda and Taliban murderers." Bounty hunters or reward seekers handed people over to American or Northern Alliance soldiers in the field and then soon after disappeared. As a result, there was little opportunity on the field to verify the story of an individual who presented the detainee in response to the bounty award. Okay, now there's much more to this report, including criteria that the government used to justify enemy combatant status. And this is from the report. Examples of evidence that the government cited as proof that the detainees were enemy combatants includes the following: possession of a rifle, possession of a Casio watch, wearing olive drab clothing, use of a guest house, associations with unnamed and unidentified individuals and or organizations, and associations with organizations the members of which would be allowed into the United States by the Department of Homeland Security. Now, since the trials began, or the hearings that the Supreme Court decided that these detainees were entitled to, there's been a pretty substantial liquidation of the people at Guantanamo Bay. So my overall point is this: what point did Guantanamo Bay serve if the people there are not being tried, and a decent number of them have already been released? I think this type of report, and again, I want you to look at it and decide for yourself whether you think it's credible. It would be less credible to me if it were not based on the government's records, and less credible if so many people hadn't been released by the Bush administration. By the way, obviously, President Obama hasn't released anyone yet. And if the documents themselves are from the Defense Department or the United States government, I think that does lend some credibility to this. But again, I want you to read it for yourself and draw your own conclusion. Frank, you there? I think I have a call. Frank? Thought I had him. I had Frank from Appalachian on line 1. I think I lost him. I'll try him back. Frank, if you hung up, call back, and if not, how about now? Can you hear me? Frank? Well, Frank's a regular caller. I'm going to send somebody to his house if I don't, if he doesn't call back. In any event, I do believe that the process of releasing people from Guantanamo says as much about the war on terror as the process of putting them there in the first place. I don't know how so many people got released. I really don't. I mean, these were supposed to be the people who represented the gravest threat to the United States of America, and over half of them are already gone, without ever having been tried, without any real explanation to the public as to why they were released. Now, as far as the people who are still there, I think our system can handle 245 people. I do. And by the way, I highly doubt that somebody picked up in Afghanistan or Pakistan has a valid visa or has any right to be in America. So this notion from the article that I read at the top of the hour that these people could be released on a technicality and into the quiet streets of America, that's also, complete fiction. They'll be deported. They have no right to be here other than to stand trial. If acquitted, it's not like they're going to walk out the front door of the courthouse and, stretch and blend into a quiet American neighborhood. That's just the type of irresponsible talk that we get anymore in place of real debate. But there's zero chance of that happening because there's no, these aren't the types of people who are going to fall through the cracks if they're acquitted. These are the types of people who are going to be deported immediately if they're acquitted. Right now we have a new president who's going about things differently. There's no question about that. And my question about Guantanamo is, what's the difference if it closes? What is the harm? I've really yet to hear a credible argument about that. Other than these scare scenarios, we're going to have them on our streets. That is, of course, untrue. Of course that is untrue. Zero chance of that. Most of the people there never fought against the United States. Why pay for them at Guantanamo? And to me, I realize this is a little different approach to this than you hear usually. I'm frustrated that the people who have been captured, who are responsible for the deaths of Americans, have not been tried. What are we doing? It's beyond... Forget the fact that it's a public relations fiasco and all that other stuff. How about the fact that people who have killed Americans have not been convicted of it, even though we have them? Put them on trial, be done with it. If there's no evidence, they'll be acquitted. If they're guilty, they get what they get. And America gets something more, which is a little justice for somebody who's killed Americans. What are we waiting for here? I don't know why we bothered with Guantanamo. I don't. All it did was delay justice for people who killed Americans and created a ridiculous, unnecessary injustice for people who had no business being detained at all. This whole bounty hunter thing. Come on. The last article I read, and I don't have it with me, some federal judge, a Bush appointee, released 5 people basically saying, what are you doing? There's zero evidence that these people did anything. Get them out of here. It just doesn't serve our national interest to do this. And as I say every time we talk about foreign policy on this show, it should be based selfishly on our national interest. That was one thing that I did like from Barack Obama's speech when he was his inaugural speech, when he said that our relations with Muslims are going to be based on what's in our national interest. That's the way it should be. I've been saying that for a year. It shouldn't be based on morals or anything like that. It should be to promote our national interest. That's what it's for. I'm going to try another caller in again. I got Jim from Hillcrest. You there?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. Morning.
Good morning, Bob.
Welcome to the show.
Hey, I have a question that been haunting me for a while about Guantanamo Bay. I don't know, do you know how long that foothold that we have with the prison has been there?
You mean how long we've had the right to have a base there?
Yeah.
I believe it's a 99-year lease. I looked that up myself. I don't know when it was signed. It seemed obvious to me that why is it, it's like us having a prison built somewhere in Russia that we can use. I wondered that. But
yeah,
it's a long-term lease.
They're communists, and we're supposed to be at odds or
right.
against them. Something smells like a fish, if you know what I mean.
Yes, but I'm almost certain, and I will verify that by next week, that we have a 99-year lease for that property.
you know, what, and I guess, I don't know, the Freedom of Information Act probably wouldn't get us anywhere on why that they're allowing us to do this.
No, I think it would. I think I can find out within an hour.
Is it money, or are they actually behind closed doors, like wringing their hands, like having some bigger plan to...
I don't think it's an agreement that Castro signed with us. I think it predated Castro, but I think we have a 99-year lease for that part of Cuba. And ordinarily, you know, if you're Castro and you come in there and you want a tenant out, you kick them out. But when it's a heavily armed American base, probably not as easy to do. And I believe it is because of a 99-year lease. Actually, Jim, I got one more call, and I think it's Frank, who I didn't get a chance to talk to before. I'm going to try and get to him. But thanks very much for calling.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Okay. A show without Frank. It's like a day without sunshine. Frank, are you there?
Yep.
All right.
I got some comments about Guantanamo. I think one big problem is that this is a war, but not a declared war. How in the heck did we get in this position? You know, Congress is supposed to declare war. Now we have presidents declaring war.
And the other problem with that is that when you say that you're going to detain somebody through the entire conflict, when you've declared war on a tactic rather than a nation, when does it end?
Well, you know, in previous wars, prisoners were put in prisoner of war camps, and they sat there for the duration of the war. And then in some cases, after the war ended, there were military tribunals, you know, set up to try these leaders. But
right.
we need to discuss and establish new rules of war.
I agree.
One of my questions to you is, why should foreign nationals captured on the battlefield get constitutional protection? That doesn't seem to make sense to me.
Well, I think that the Supreme Court has decided that they should, and it's because we're holding them in an American facility.
Oh, okay.
This is different than Nuremberg. But my only answer to that is that the court determined that Guantanamo Bay was every bit as much, as a practical matter, a part of American soil as anything else. It's run by Americans, you know, under a lease. We are the custodians of that property.
I see.
And, you know, again, actually, thanks for the call, Frank. Sorry I lost you before.
Just a quick comment here on national talk show hosts. I've called into some of these, and basically what you get is 3 or 4 sentences. They cut you off, and then the host does a number on you.
Right, and
I think the exceptions are Dennis Miller, who runs a great talk show, and Jay Severin, who isn't on anymore as far as I know. But I called into him once, and I even sort of baited him just to see what he would do, and like I do with you sometimes. And I said, you know, you're too hard on Bill Clinton, and he was a conservative host, and I was treated very well on there. He listened to me, and we talked back and forth, and he was a great host.
Well, you know, and I'll address that right now. I was going to wait. I'm running out of time here. Thanks very much for calling, Frank.
Bye.
Bye. The problem I have, and I called into a show last night, and I had a question. And I'm not going to get into what I called about or which show it was, because it doesn't really matter. This happens on both sides. I don't have a problem with the radio show host cutting off the caller. I guess that's their right. However, my problem is they don't tell the audience they've done it. I was on the phone last night. I got on. I had 2 questions to ask. I asked my first question. There was a long delay on that show. Probably 15 seconds or so. And then I was cut off. And when I listened, I turned my radio back on after they'd hung up on me. He cut off my question in such a way as to completely change the meaning of it, and didn't tell the audience that he had cut me off. I mean, if you don't have the guts to take a question on your own show and answer it, you don't belong on the radio. It's beyond intellectually dishonest. It's cowardice. You don't have the guts to take a question and answer it on its merits. You don't belong there. It's misinformation. It is a lie by omission to your audience. There have been one or two people since I started doing this show who I've told, I'm not going to let you go on with that. I don't want to hear the demeaning, degrading characterizations of somebody else. That's what this show is against. But I tell them, and then I end the call. I have never, and I will never, cut somebody off without the audience knowing it, and then making it sound like their question was something or their comment was something that it wasn't, and it only sounds a certain way because I've manipulated it by truncating it. And then these hosts, they go on and on as if the awestruck caller is just absorbing their wisdom and unable to speak, so persuaded by the host's remarks. It is dishonest, it is deceitful, and it's wrong, in my view. And that will never happen on this show. We're going to take one last quick break, and then I'll come back. But you are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WNBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. Okay, only a couple minutes left on this week's show. As the Obama administration gets underway, we're going to have a lot of discussion about all of his policies. But as far as the war on terror and Guantanamo is concerned, specifically, I think, as I do with all issues, that we should have an honest debate about it. And that has to begin with an honest and thorough understanding of the actual facts. Most of the people housed at Guantanamo have already been released. There's 200 some left. That is 0.0000 some percent of the population of our prisons right now. We certainly have room for them. If they're all guilty, we have the capacity to try them. If no more are going to be released, let's get on with it. This is not the standpoint you are used to hearing, I'm sure, where people are saying we should close Guantanamo because it's hurting our reputation around the world and all that other stuff. I'm mad on the other end of this thing. I want the people who are responsible for killing Americans tried. Nobody's talking about that. Everybody's talking about what happens if they're, let off on some technicality. When's the last time that happened, by the way? And released into our neighborhoods. That's all garbage. And this is supposed to be from senators, United States senators? Well, I want them in my district. I don't want them in my district. Do you want them in your district? This country deserves a better conversation about this issue. And I think we should push for it. Justice delayed is justice denied. These people have been sitting there for 6 or 7 years, some of them guilty of killing Americans. Let's get on with it. Thank you for listening to You Defend It, and please visit my website, www.youdefendit.com, to give me your comments and to see the topics for next week's show. I am Rob Kilmer. We will see you next week.